It was Christmas Eve, and my mother's family used to hold a large celebration at my aunt's house. This was my girlfriend's first time meeting with my extended family, but she got along quite well with them. We spent the majority of the afternoon and evening talking, playing poker, and opening presents. We left around 11 p.m. or so I was driving my girlfriend's car along Highway 211. This stretch of road is surrounded by farms and dense patches of forest, and parts of it are unlit. But nothing to fear. I grew up in this area, so I knew this road like the back of my hand. The both of us were just driving and talking away, just two young lovers making the most of our moment together. Now, there's a portion of the highway that descends down an enormous hill before crossing Deep Creek. Surrounding both sides of the road are thick forests. There are no lights, and the only thing we could see was the area directly in front of our headlights. I drive down the hill, across the bridge, and uphill through more forest, and it's as the highway starts to flatten out that it happens. Something sprints across the road so suddenly that I almost hit whatever it was. I slam on the brakes, turn to my girlfriend, and ask her if she saw it. She said she did, but she couldn't make out what it was. I thought maybe it was a coyote, as they are a fairly common sight in this area, but something felt off about it. Whatever it was, it disappeared into the woods next to the road. Coyotes don't usually just dart out in front of cars, not like that anyway. So for some reason, I decide to check it out. I turn the car around and switch on the high beams to better light up the forest. I step out of the car and walk towards the forest. I don't see anything, but now it feels like I might have made a big mistake. My heart is pounding, and the hairs on the back of my head are standing at full attention. But I don't see anything unusual in the trees. Suddenly, the car's horn blasts. I walk back into the car and ask my girlfriend why she leaned on the horn like that. She said nothing, and instead, she pointed to a spot about 50 feet from where I was standing. I looked over in that direction, and that's when I saw it. It was a man. He was completely naked. His skin was covered in dirt and mud, and in one of his hands, he was holding a hatchet. He looked back at us and smiled and waved just before turning back around and walking into the forest. Needless to say, we got the hell out of there. Once we were safely driving again, my girlfriend explained what had just happened. While I was trying to look for the man in the area he initially vanished in, he circled back around and came out from another spot in the forest. My girlfriend had seen something out of the corner of her eye, and that's when she saw him. Before she honked the horn, he was walking towards me with his hatchet raised as if he was going to strike me. We called the authorities once we got back home safely, but they never found anyone. Or they did and just didn't tell us. The officer we spoke to explained his theory. The man was obviously looking to ambush unsuspecting travelers for Lord only knows what reason. We all agreed that my girlfriend's quick thinking saved my life, as it let my potential killer know that I wasn't alone out there. I moved back to the area recently, so now I drive that highway often. No naked hatchman sightings yet, thankfully, but I can tell you that I'm definitely extra vigilant now, especially near Deep Creek. This happened about 5 years ago, while I was 9 months pregnant. I was Christmas shopping at a mall with my then 7 and 15-year-old daughters one Saturday night, in a very safe city with a very low crime rate. There was an Applebee's connected to the mall, and we ended our shopping pretty late. The mall stores were starting to close, so I took my kids to the connected Applebee's for a late dinner. We finish up eating around 10 p.m. and leave out the Applebee's entrance into the practically deserted parking lot. As we got to the car, I was in the middle of maneuvering the shopping bags on my arms to find my keys when this old, crusty-looking guy starts walking up to us from somewhere in the parking lot. He had shaggy gray hair and a faded flannel shirt with old jeans. I noticed him briskly approaching us when he was about 40 feet away, and he said, "This is a stick-up. Give me all your money." My blood ran cold, and I stared at him owlishly and shakingly said, "What?" He then said he was just kidding and came up and stood right next to my daughters, who were standing on the other side of my car waiting for me to unlock it. He then starts making small talk with me and my girls. He's asking things like if they were being good girls for Santa and how old they were. He didn't seem drunk or mentally challenged at all. He was very coherent and seemed of sound mind. Mind you, I was a heavily pregnant woman, alone with my 2 daughters in a mostly deserted parking lot at 10 o'clock at night. Being approached by a stranger who came and stood right next to my kids on the other side of my car, just shooting the breeze. Talking to me and my kids with his hands in his pockets and occasionally looking over his shoulder. I didn't want to aggravate him, so I was politely conversing with him and trying to look calm and nonchalant while trying to disguise my frantic hands digging inside my purse. This exchange went on for a couple of minutes while he periodically kept looking over his shoulder. I was silently panicking and trying to politely keep the situation from escalating by calmly and nonchalantly talking to him while also trying in vain to find my damn keys. They were in there hiding good. I felt that at any moment he was going to pull out a weapon and rob us, and my kids were right next to him. He kept trying to engage them in conversation, and I could see that my oldest daughter was a little weirded out. She kept glancing at me to gauge my reaction to the situation, and being that he was talking and acting friendly, and I was doing my best to stay calm, my kids were oblivious to the alarming situation we were all in. And being 9 months pregnant, I was no match for this full-grown man, especially if he was hiding a weapon on him. While still desperately digging for my keys, I tried to politely give him hints that the conversation was over by saying things like, "It was nice chatting with you, but I gotta get these kids to bed." My polite attempts to get this guy to leave weren't working. He kept talking to my kids and asking them what their favorite school subjects are and how nice young ladies they were, while I was struggling with the shopping bags and digging in my cluttered purse. My outgoing 7-year-old was completely oblivious to how not okay this situation was. She started to talk about what she picked out for Daddy for Christmas, and enthusiastically talking about kid stuff and asking him if he knew Minecraft, keeping this creep from leaving us alone. She didn't realize that I was becoming desperate to get them the hell out of there. Then, I suddenly felt this sinking feeling of dread when I realized that I may have lost my keys in the mall, and that we were stuck outside with this strange man who kept looking over his shoulders and was showing no signs of walking away. I remember thinking that he was waiting for the perfect moment to pounce. All he had to do was grab one of my girls and threaten their life, knowing it would make me do whatever he wanted. I started to feel my adrenaline spike, and my heart and stomach were doing flips. I felt like at any moment, something was gonna go down, as I realized that there were no other people or witnesses around, and we were totally alone with him. The odds were stacked against us. Then, he all of a sudden was like, "Okay, it was nice talking with you. See you later," and walked off in the same direction he came. It wasn't until then that I found my car keys. I unlocked the car and told my kids to get in fast. I got in too, locked the doors, and drove the hell out of there. My 15-year-old lightheartedly and jokingly said, "Okay, that was weird," and laughed. I was overwhelmed with relief, but then I was confused over what just happened. I thought to myself, why the hell would a guy of seemingly sound mind think it's totally acceptable to go out of his way just to approach a woman and her kids in a deserted parking lot, late at night, just to chat? But being that nothing bad happened, I brushed it off and joked about it too. When we got home, my husband greeted us and asked us how shopping went. I said it went well, and my 15-year-old told him about what happened in the parking lot and how weird it was, and was kinda joking about it. I started joking too, saying how I was mentally having a panic attack while trying to look calm, and how I was attempting to nonchalantly rummage through my purse to find my keys. My husband went completely white, and I acknowledged his horrified look of alarm and assured him that, albeit creepy, the guy was just talking and eventually left on his own. But that didn't make him feel better. You see, my father-in-law is a retired sheriff deputy, and my husband went through police academy training after graduating high school, so with the knowledge he gained from that, plus growing up with the cop for a dad, I found out why my husband looked absolutely horrified when I told him the details. What my husband told me completely rattled me to the bone. He was 100% sure that the reason why the guy was hanging around us and chit-chatting was because he was waiting for me to unlock the car. And the reason why he was standing next to our kids was because once I unlocked the car and the kids started to get inside, he was most likely going to pull out a weapon and force himself into the car with the kids, which would make me get into the car with them and do whatever he wanted, which most likely would be to drive to the middle of nowhere to do God knows what. Another thing was that he wasn't wearing a mask, which probably means that his intentions were to leave no witnesses to identify him. My husband then told me that the most likely reason why the guy ended up leaving was because it took so long for me to find my keys, and the longer it took, the more anxious and spooked it made him. And that whole time, I was desperate to find my keys, which, through some sort of divine intervention, stayed hidden in my purse, saving us from potentially being abducted. This happened a few years ago, close to Christmas time. I work at home and have since the early 2000s. At the time, I was renting a house in a blue-collar, middle-class neighborhood. My son was in high school at the time and woke up with a raging headache that day, so I let him stay home. It was mid-morning when my doorbell rang. It wasn't unusual. The neighborhood we lived in was kind of a prime spot for door-to-door solicitors, Jehovah's Witnesses, and the like. I yelled for my son to get it because he was so much better at getting rid of those types. No joke, the kid has this deadpan stare that would make the devil flinch. Then I just forgot about it. It wasn't until later that night that I even remember it happened. I asked my son who it was. The landscaper, he said. Gary? That seemed odd. Gary lived across the street from me and ran his own landscaping business. He only came over once in the winter to do some basic maintenance, and he'd just done that the weekend before. No, the other one. His son, I think, my son said. That was even weirder. Gary's stepson had moved in with him over the summer. I'd like to claim that my instincts were strong enough to know that something was off with the guy, but honestly, I barely knew he existed. Sometimes he helped Gary do my yard, but for the most part, he never even spoke, so him coming to my door didn't make any sense. My son said that he didn't say anything. As soon as he opened the door, he just said sorry and left. This didn't seem like anything too concerning. From what I did know about Gary's stepson, he was awkward, like no eye contact, grunting a hello awkward. I gave a passing thought to go over to Gary's to see what he needed, but decided not to bother. It didn't seem like a big deal. It wouldn't be until a few months later that I learned it was anything but. See, about a week after he knocked on my door, I got another knock. Again early in the morning. This time my son was at school, so I answered it. It was a police officer. They were canvassing the neighborhood looking for a woman who'd gone missing. She'd gone out for a jog a few days before and had never come home. The police were asking pretty much everyone on her route if they'd see anything. I looked at the picture and didn't recognize her. A few weeks later, they found the missing woman's body. She was left in a county burn pile, the kind that landscapers in my area use to dispose of yard waste. And that's how they traced it back to Gary's stepson. About a month after they found her body, he was arrested, but I didn't learn about the arrest until I got another knock on the door. This time, it was a police detective. He was following up because during the stepson's confession, he admitted something terrifying. That day, he had seen her running past his house around 11 a.m., and no one was around because it was a weekday, and most people in our neighborhood were at work or school, so he chased her down and abducted her. But that's not all. He also informed the detective that he actually planned to kill a different woman that day instead. Problem was, when he went to the original target's home, her 6-foot, 230-pound teenage son answered the door instead. Realizing that trying to confront that kid wouldn't end well, he went home and waited on the porch for a while, hoping that her kid would leave so he could try again. And that's when he saw the jogger. When the detective was talking, I was detached in a "why are you telling me all this" kind of way. Then I remembered that weird visit from the landscaper's son, and I realized I was the target he was talking about. If my son hadn't stayed home and opened the door that day, I would have been the woman they pulled out of that brush pile. My son's testimony became pretty important. It was used to show that the landscaper's son wasn't nuts when he committed the crime, as he was logical enough to plan out a murder. He just didn't get to kill the person he wanted to, that person being me. I still have a lot of guilt about everything that happened. First, because I put my son in front of a cold-blooded killer. If that guy wasn't a wimp who only went after people weaker than him, that day could have gone way different. And second, because some other lady technically died in my place. Logically, I know it wasn't my fault, but on that emotional, non-logical level, I feel bad because I know if I'd opened the door that day, that lady would still be alive, but I wouldn't be. And even knowing now what I didn't know then, I still wouldn't have answered the door. This one doesn't sound scary at first, but the ending is crazy. Last year on Boxing Day, I found a really cool ornament in a clearance box. It had a built-in camera to record a unique perspective on your holiday celebrations. I grabbed the last one from the store and brought it back home for less than $10, but I forgot about it until my wife and I and my 2 daughters decorated the house earlier this month. I told my daughters about the camera and said we'd secretly catch Santa in the act. I had an old costume in the attic and was planning to deliver some gifts in full view of the camera on Christmas night. My girls were overjoyed and went back and forth trying to find the best place to put the ornament on the tree. They had no idea I repositioned it later, so it could actually catch the living room at a good angle. In the nights leading up to Christmas, I turned the camera on to make sure everything was working properly. In the morning, I previewed the footage, just long enough to confirm that it was working. Satisfied, I inserted the micro SD card back into the ornament and slipped in a new battery in anticipation for the big night. We enjoyed our Christmas Eve as a family, playing board games and eating way more junk food than there was room in our stomachs. Like we do every year, we let our daughters open one gift each before going to bed. The girls, still riding their sugar high, could be heard giggling in their bedrooms from all the way upstairs, and from time to time, my wife and I could hear one of them shush the other, claiming she'd heard hooves on the roof or bells jingling. Eventually, our kiddos dozed off. My wife kissed me on the cheek and headed to bed while I turned off all the lights. I got the costume and tiptoed into the living room, getting ready for my big feature film debut. I did everything you'd expect Santa to do. I ate most of the cookies, I drank the milk, I pet my large stomach and said my ho-ho-hos, and I dropped a few presents by the fireplace, all in full view of the camera. A pretty good acting job if I do say so myself. On Christmas morning, the girls came running into our bedroom to wake us up. They excitedly insisted we watch the video before opening the presents. I transferred the footage to my laptop and forwarded it to where Santa showed up and pressed play. My girls squealed with delight and jumped in front of the screen, frantically waving at Santa while obscuring the video from my view. It brought me so much joy to see how happy the girls were. I was too lazy to stop the video, so it continued to play in the background while we unwrapped the gifts. I spotted a box I didn't see the night before. It was small and wrapped in a blue foil paper I did not recognize. My name was on it, but my wife seemed as surprised as I was to see it there. Noticing my confusion, my youngest daughter spoke. "Daddy, that's gotta be from Mr. Elf." I was ready to dismiss her elf comment as just another weird things kids say, but my wife wasn't so quick to ignore it. "Honey, what elf?" she said. My daughter pointed to the laptop. By then, the video had ended, and all that was left on the screen was a preview of the first frame. "The one that came with Santa," she answered. Panic struck me. I know my wife didn't dress up as an elf. I scanned the video, clicking forward and back, until I saw what my daughter had seen. There was someone in the living room. He walked into the corner after I had turned the lights off, and stood there watching me parading around as Santa. The video went completely quiet after that. It was as if the camera had failed to record a single sound. The strange tall man in an elf costume stood perfectly still in the corner for over an hour, just watching the camera from a distance. After a while, he walked over to the plate of cookies and bit off the head of a gingerbread man. I then glanced at the plate and saw his teeth mark on the decapitated cookie. The man then quietly approached the Christmas tree. I thought the audio wasn't working, but as he reached the tree, I began hearing his slow and steady breaths. He reached towards the ornament, and the video stopped. In a terrified frenzy, I grabbed the blue box he'd left behind. I ripped the bow off of it and tossed it away. I frantically removed the wrapping paper, opened the box, and looked inside. There, on a bed of bubble wrap, was the battery I'd put in the camera the night before. My wife took the ornament and opened the back. The battery was missing. I don't know what scares me more, what the camera caught, or what the guy might have done after he turned off the camera. Christmas Eve dinner at Burger King. Sounds innocent enough, right? It wasn't my first choice, but I had to work late, and being Christmas Eve, it seemed like my best option. I finished work around 9 p.m. and had some coupons for Burger King, which made the decision easier. When I got to Burger King, I noticed it was still open, but the dining room was closed. The only way to order was at the drive-thru. The problem, I didn't have a car. I tried walking up to the drive-thru to place my order, but the young woman working there wouldn't allow it. She told me I couldn't use the drive-thru unless I had a vehicle. Frustrated, I said some things I'm not proud of. That's when an older woman appeared. She offered me to hop into her car to order my food. At first, I declined, not wanting to impose. But after some convincing, I accepted her help. After placing my order, the wait for the food was so long that I ended up missing my bus. Upset, I considered my options. The kind woman then offered me a ride. At first, I felt uneasy about accepting her offer, but she was persistent and polite, eventually convincing me. I figured I was safe. After all, I'm a 250-pound man in my 30s, and she was an older woman in her 50s. Under different circumstances, I wouldn't have agreed, but I decided to go with her. After I told her where I lived, she started driving me home. However, when we got about 5 minutes from my house, she made a wrong turn. I pointed out the mistake and told her we needed to turn around or let me out so I can walk the rest of the way. That's when her demeanor changed. She said she couldn't let me spend Christmas Eve alone and insisted she was taking me to her house. I explained that I needed to get home to let my dog out and reassured her I'd be fine. Then she tried to entice me by offering me drugs and liquor. Being in recovery, I told her I wasn't interested. She refused to turn around or let me out and started driving erratically, running stop signs and acting strange. My mind was racing. I began to sweat, trying to figure out what to do. While I knew I could physically overpower her, I didn't know what was waiting at her house. I also felt conflicted. I didn't want to hurt her after she'd initially been so kind. Then, as luck would have it, her car slowed down at a stop sign, blocked by another car in front of us and one across the intersection. When her car nearly stopped, I made my move. I jumped out while the car was still moving, leaving my food behind, and ran as fast as I could. She stopped the car, got out, and began calling out to me, trying to convince me to get back in. That wasn't an option. I didn't look back, running all the way home and making sure I wasn't followed. To this day, I don't know what her motives were, kidnapping or something else entirely. The thought of what could have happened if I hadn't been sober still haunts me. 2 years earlier, I might have taken her offer of drugs and liquor, making myself an easier target. This experience made me think deeply about the vulnerability most women face every day. As a man, that fear was foreign to me, but now I understand it better. I truly believe this nice woman had sinister intentions, and that I just happened to be the wrong victim for her plan. I've debated whether to file a police report. What if by not reporting this, someone else gets hurt? On the other hand, I fear the police might not believe me or just might dismiss my experience.